Hello, I'm Darren Jackal. I'm in my studio. I talk about product development, design, and mountaineering. Welcome to another edition of Experimental Design, Discourse, and Disclosure. In today's episode, I'm going to continue my discussion on design, and I will continue to use the LAMP project as an example of this. I've been using my old thesis from the 90s to talk about the design process. And so we looked at design process, we looked at the paranoid critical method, Salvador Dali, talked about seeing, and then I introduced this concept of scale and fractional dimensions or fractals. We use this as a discussion for talking about effective dimensionality, where a point has no dimensions but requires three numbers to place it in space. We talked about a line having a single dimension length, a plane having two dimensions, length and width, and a volume having three dimensions. This leads to a discussion on cardinal coordinate planes and anatomical position and how we talk about motion in the body. This whole portion is pretty much a primer on things you would need to know to understand the photo I'm talking about. So this is all kind of coming from the Eames's idea of innovation through iteration, and how I was looking at a whole bunch of different things for my thesis on footwear and other things that I was doing in my design build for clients. So one of the things that we should talk about is this idea of forces acting on materials and deformation. So when I was playing with these plastic pieces, trying to find a proper form for the sconce that would later become the basis for the floor lamp, I was being influenced by a variety of different things. One was a graphic I saw on this particular item. This is Garrett Riedfeld from De Stijl, Red Blue Chair. And the interesting thing about this is I saw a graphic of this, a drawing of it, where it was like an exploded view showing how all of these square elements came together with these planar pieces to create this form. Now, if we look at these square pieces and we take the center of them, we can kind of think of these as essentially lines in space and the planes as two-dimensional. So this is kind of an interesting concept of effective dimensionality, where there's essentially planes and lines coming together to create this chair. And from that, I started thinking about being a kid again, when we used to take popsicle sticks and create something from them just by force and deformation. So let me get this set up here so you can see that I've created something that just by using the simple single dimensionality type of components, but added force to it and deformation to create something that will stick together. Now, it will explode, and that's what happened to the lamp when I went along with this plan. So my idea was, can I take something like this, and I don't even know what dimensionality this would be. Once you start adding force, which is an invisible sort of concept, and deformation, which you can't see, you start to be able to create a variety of different objects. So that, and I just happen to have, things sitting around in my studio, and one of the things I had was a paperclip, and I just grabbed that paperclip and I bent it to look like this. And I thought to myself, well, can I make a floor lamp that kind of uses two vertical uprights combined with planes and lines to create a lamp? And so that's when I decided to, or not when I decided, that's when I started to experiment with things like this. These are small, what I call partie models. These are just expressions of potential form. And what I want you to notice here is don't pay attention to the base here, but look at the frame and the essentially the lenses being held into the frame by these cross sticks. Forces are being used to hold them in space. Now the thing to recognize here is that I made a couple of assumptions here that I later went on to rectify, and that is the 90-degree angle of this. I kind of stuck with that for a bit, and then something happened and to change that, and I'll show you. The other was that I was crossing these two horizontal elements in between the vertical elements to create the force, the deformation in the force to resist it from moving. So that led to a variety of different explorations into different lens shape, and you can see I'm using paper here because the original plastic I was using was styrene, and styrene is opaque and doesn't allow light to diffuse through it. So I started working with paper. Eventually I came to the conclusion that I needed to bring all of these elements together, the light diffusion and the resistive forces required to create the shape to hold the component into the frame, but also to house the bulb and the light. It needed to do all those things that basically a lampshade needs to do. I started my quest for a material that could do all those things, and that took quite a bit of time, and we'll get into the problems with that and the mistakes that were made. Next thing I'm going to talk about is when you're designing a product for a client, your selection criteria is going to be based a lot upon what they think is the right solution, and what they're going to be considering will have a lot to do with aesthetics. So in this next portion of this talk, I'm going to focus on aesthetics. All right, let's talk about aesthetics. This is a very large and deep topic, and we're not going to be able to cover it all, but let's just look at the basics from Wikipedia. Aesthetics is the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature of beauty and taste. It's associated with the philosophy of art. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the philosophy of this. I just want to talk more in general terms about our, what I call aesthetic sensibilities, and where do those aesthetic sensibilities come from. And in my opinion, and I'll just look at Aristotle's here, the foundation for our aesthetic sense is to be found in nature. And Aristotle states that all human artistry follows the pattern of nature. So this is Vitruvian Man. This is by Da Vinci. He is studying nature in a very accessible form, and that is the human form. So my suggestion is that if you want to understand the foundations of our aesthetic sensibilities, is that you understand the human form. That will help you understand things like proportion, balance, symmetry, scale, many other things. You will probably discover things like the Fibonacci series. You will also discover the golden mean, probably. You might discover the Corbusier and the modular. When we were exploring nature doing these figure studies, we were doing it in the context of architectural graphics. So this was using eye movement based upon viewing abstract art. And so a visual language was created from that. And that visual language was associated with architecture and therefore tectonics. Tectonics is an artistic way to express the corporeality of a building through architectural forms that visually reflect the actual structure. Structures that I would say are tectonically accurate. They make sense visually. Something like the arch. If we're talking about industrial design and objects, we can look at the term concinnity. The skillful and harmonious arrangement or fitting together of the different parts of something. Del Coates uses this in a very particular way, and we're going to look at that next. But what Del Coates would say is that an object with the most amount of concinnity would be a sphere. And just by me saying the word sphere would be enough to provide a vision in your own mind of what that is. So he's going to use concinnity in a specific way. This is the abstract from a paper but it's important to know here because what we want to do is we want to try and figure out a way to use aesthetics as a way to select for our variations to move forward. So how can we do that? And this is one way that we can do it. This paper describes a methodology for optimizing the pleasurable effects of a product design without mitigating ergonomic imperatives. A designer employs it, that is the methodology, by manipulating just 4 of the product's visual properties: contrast, what he calls objective information; novelty, subjective information; and 2 properties called objective concinnity and subjective concinnity that facilitates a viewer's ability to process the design's inherent information quickly enough to derive effective pleasure and/or ergonomic benefit from it. When I see an object against the background, what Delcoats calls contrast, this is objective information. If I can discern an object from the background, and it is an object that I have never seen before, the new object would be novel to me, and this is what Delcoats would call subjective information. My experience with the world will provide me with some understanding of the objects that make up my world, and this is what Delcoats would term subjective concinnity, what I bring with me when I interact with a novel object. Objective concinnity relates to the inherent qualities of a design that makes it feel like it makes sense. If I was an individual that was not particularly worldly, and I had only ever had a very basic glass to drink from, any glass that did not look like the glass I normally use would be new or novel to me. This is contrast, objective information, and novelty, subjective information. Because most glasses share essential features, the new glass would have enough inherent objective concinnity that, combined with the limited subjective concinnity that I possess, would allow me to process the information in a way that I would be able to use the new glass as intended. The idea is that a novel object will elicit a response from a new user. That response may be negative and turn the user away. It may be positive and engage the user in an enjoyable experience. Or it may just not be that interesting and they simply don't care. Well, this episode's getting a little bit long, so I'm going to shut her down right about here. Next episode, I'm going to take a little bit of a closer look at the product development side of this project and how it has influenced this project. So stay tuned. I'm Darren Jackal. I'm in my studio. Thanks again for coming by to another episode of Experimental Design, Discourse, and Disclosure. We'll see you next time.